Danny Cooper stared at the screen in front of him, his fingers moving quickly across the keyboard. The lab was quiet except for the soft hum of machines and the distant sound of the ship's engines. He pushed his glasses up his nose and squinted at the data. 3 years of research, all stored in this one tablet. Everything he knew about alien biology was right here. The ship shook. Danny grabbed the edge of his desk as books and equipment fell to the floor. The lights flickered. Red emergency lights came on, turning everything the color of blood. An alarm started screaming through the speakers. All crew to battle stations. This is not a drill. I repeat, this is not a drill. Danny's hand shook as he tried to save his work. He had never been in a real fight before. The Horizon was a research vessel, not a warship. They had some weapons, but not many. He heard shouting in the hallway outside. Then came the sound of running feet. The ship shook again, harder this time. Danny fell out of his chair. His tablet slid across the floor and hit the wall. The screen cracked, but it still glowed. He crawled over and grabbed it, holding it against his chest like it was the most important thing in the world. To him it was gunfire echoed through the halls, not human weapons. These sounded different, like lightning striking metal. Danny's heart pounded so hard he thought it might break through his ribs. He looked around the lab for somewhere to hide. There was a storage closet in the corner, behind the tall shelves full of sample containers. He ran to it and squeezed inside, pulling the door almost closed. Through the crack he could see part of the lab. His breath came in short gasps. He tried to be quiet, but fear made it hard. More gunfire. Closer now. Someone screamed. The sound cut off suddenly. The lab door exploded inward. 3 figures entered, and Danny had never seen anything like them. They were tall, at least 7 feet, with bodies covered in dark green scales that looked like armor. Their heads were long and narrow, with eyes that glowed yellow in the red emergency light. When they opened their mouths to speak to each other, Danny saw rows of sharp teeth and long forked tongues. The Sithrak. Danny had read about them in reports, but seeing them in person was different. They moved like snakes, smooth and fast. Each one carried a weapon that crackled with blue energy. They searched the lab, knocking over equipment and crushing delicate instruments under their clawed feet. Danny held his breath. His glasses were sliding down his nose, but he was too scared to push them back up. Even that small movement might give him away. One of the Sithrak stopped near the closet. Danny could hear it breathing, a sound like wind through dead leaves. It sniffed the air. Its forked tongue flickered out, tasting for something. For him, the closet door was ripped open. Danny fell backward, landing hard on his tailbone. The Sithrak reached down with one clawed hand and grabbed him by the front of his shirt, lifting him off the ground like he weighed nothing. Danny's feet kicked in the air. His tablet fell and hit the floor again. "Please," Danny said. His voice came out as a squeak. "Please don't kill me." The Sithrak brought Danny close to its face. Its breath smelled like old meat. Those yellow eyes looked him up and down, and then the creature made a sound. It took Danny a moment to realize it was laughing. The Sithrak said something in its own language. The words sounded like rocks grinding together. It carried Danny out of the lab and into the hallway. Danny saw bodies. Human bodies. People he had eaten lunch with just hours ago. He closed his eyes and tried not to be sick. They brought him to what used to be the bridge of the Horizon. Now it was full of Sithrak warriors. They had taken over the ship completely. In the center of the room stood the largest Sithrak Danny had seen yet. This one wore armor decorated with symbols Danny didn't recognize. It had scars across its face and neck, old wounds that told stories of many battles. The Sithrak holding Danny threw him to the floor. Danny's knees hit hard. His glasses fell off and everything became blurry. He fumbled for them, found them, put them back on. One lens was cracked now. The large Sithrak stepped forward. It looked down at Danny the way a person might look at an insect. When it spoke, the words came out in broken English. "You are last," it said. "Captain dead. Soldiers dead. Only you." Danny tried to stand, but his legs wouldn't work. He stayed on his knees. "I'm a researcher," he said. "I'm not a fighter. I study alien life. I don't hurt anyone." The large Sithrak made that grinding laugh sound again. "Weak," it said. "Pathetic human." It turned to the other Sithrak and spoke in their language. They laughed too. "I am Velcros," the large one said, turning back to Danny. "I am commander. I killed your captain in combat. He fought with honor. You?" Velcros leaned down. "You hide in closet like prey animal. You are not worth killing like warrior. Danny's mind raced. If they weren't going to kill him like the others, what did that mean? Was he a prisoner? Would they ransom him? Velcros made a gesture, and two Sithrak grabbed Danny by his arms. They dragged him out of the bridge and through the corridors. Danny tried to ask where they were taking him, but they didn't answer. They just pulled him along like a piece of cargo. They went down, below the main decks, into areas of the ship Danny had never seen before. The Sithrak must have opened up new sections, or maybe these were parts of their own ship. Everything looked different down here. The walls were made of dark metal that seemed to absorb light. Strange symbols were carved into the surfaces. They stopped at a large circular opening in the floor. Danny looked down and saw nothing but darkness. A smell came up from below, something animal and dangerous. He heard sounds, hissing, the scrape of scales on stone. The feeding pit, Velcro said from behind him. He had followed them down. Where we keep the Gorath serpents, our war beasts. They are always hungry. Danny's blood turned to ice. No, he said, please. I can be useful. I know things. I can help you. You help us by entertaining crew, Velcro said. We make bets. How long will weak human last? 1 minute, 2? The other Sithrak laughed and started talking among themselves, making wagers. Danny struggled, but the Sithrak holding him were too strong. They lifted him up, holding him over the pit. Danny looked down into the darkness and saw eyes, glowing eyes, dozens of them, all looking up at him. For the weak there is only prey, Velcro said. This is the way. The Sithrak let go. Danny fell screaming down into the darkness. He hit the ground hard, all the air rushing out of his lungs. Pain shot through his back and legs. Above him, the circle of light seemed impossibly far away. He could hear the Sithrak laughing. Then the hissing grew louder. The eyes moved closer. Danny tried to stand, but his body wouldn't respond. He lay there, gasping as the sounds of massive serpents slithering across stone filled the darkness around him. This was where he would die, alone in the dark, eaten by alien monsters while his killers laughed and made bets. Danny Cooper, the nerdy researcher who just wanted to study the stars, was about to become food for beasts. The serpents circled closer. Danny could feel their presence, huge bodies moving through the shadows. He closed his eyes and waited for the end. The end didn't come. Danny lay on the cold stone floor, eyes closed, waiting for teeth to sink into his flesh. But nothing happened. The hissing continued, moving around him in circles. He could feel the air move as large bodies passed nearby. The smell was overwhelming, like a zoo mixed with something sharper, more chemical. His scientific mind, the part that had carried him through 7 years of university and 3 years of space research, suddenly kicked in despite his terror. Why wasn't he dead yet? Predators attacked immediately when prey was vulnerable, unless they weren't sure what he was. Unless they were being cautious, Danny opened his eyes. The darkness wasn't complete. There was a faint glow coming from somewhere. Maybe bioluminescent fungi on the walls. As his eyes adjusted, he could make out shapes. The serpents were massive, each one at least 20 feet long and as thick as his torso. Their scales caught the dim light, reflecting it in patterns of green and blue. They were circling him, but they hadn't attacked. Danny forced himself to breathe slowly. 3 years studying xenobiology had taught him one important thing. When you don't understand something, observe it. Watch. Learn. React only when you have information. He slowly moved his hand to his pocket. The Sithrak hadn't searched him. Why would they? He was just prey. His tablet was still there, damaged but working. The screen was cracked badly, but when he pressed the power button, it lit up. The glow made several serpents pull back slightly. Danny kept his movements small and slow. He activated the tablet's scanner function. It was designed to analyze alien life forms, measuring everything from body temperature to chemical signals to sound frequencies. The device had cost more than a car back on Earth. Right now, it might save his life. The scanner beeped softly as it collected data. Danny watched the screen, his researcher brain taking over from his terrified animal brain. The serpents were communicating, not with sounds humans could hear, but with subsonic frequencies below the range of normal hearing. The tablet picked them up and translated them into visual patterns on the screen. More than that, the serpents were releasing pheromones. Danny could see the chemical compositions appearing on his screen. They were asking questions, not in words, but in chemical language. What is this thing? Is it food? Is it dangerous? Danny looked at the serpents more carefully now. They weren't mindless killing machines. Their eyes showed intelligence. The way they moved showed organization. There was a hierarchy. One serpent, larger than the others and covered in old scars, hung back while younger ones investigated. The Alpha, the leader. Danny had studied pack behavior in Earth animals. Wolves, lions, even certain species of reptiles showed similar patterns. But these creatures were supposed to be bioengineered weapons. The Scythrak used them to kill prisoners and keep the crew entertained. How did weapons develop social structures? Unless they weren't always weapons. Unless they were something else first. Something the Scythrak had captured and modified but never fully understood. Danny made a decision that would either save his life or end it quickly. He started speaking. Not in English, but in frequency. He used his tablet to generate subsonic sounds, copying the patterns he'd observed from the serpents. The effect was immediate. Every serpent stopped moving. They all turned to look at him. Danny's heart hammered in his chest, but he kept going. He played back the pattern that seemed to mean question, and combined it with the one that meant no threat. The Alpha serpent moved forward. It was even bigger up close, with scars that told of many fights. Some looked like claw marks from other serpents. Others looked like burns, probably from the energy weapons the Scythrak used. This creature had survived a lot. Danny kept his eyes down, remembering studies about dominance behavior. Don't challenge. Don't threaten. Show respect. He played another frequency pattern, one he hoped meant submission or something close to it. The Alpha serpent brought its head close to Danny. Its tongue flickered out, tasting the air around him. Danny could see his reflection in its large eyes. Those eyes weren't cold or empty. They were analyzing him just like he was analyzing it. Time passed. Danny wasn't sure how long. Could have been minutes. Could have been hours. Slowly, carefully, he continued to scan and observe. The tablet's memory was filling up with data. He discovered something incredible. The Gorath serpents had neural pathways that looked designed, not evolved. Someone had engineered these creatures, but not the Scythrak. The technology was too advanced, too elegant. The Scythrak had found these creatures somewhere and enslaved them. They kept them hungry and scared, using pain to control them. But they didn't understand what they had. These serpents were intelligent, possibly as intelligent as dogs or dolphins. Maybe more. Danny found patterns in the chemical signals that matched computer code. Command protocols. Someone had designed these creatures to receive and follow complex instructions, but not through pain and fear. Through partnership. Through communication. He looked at the Alpha serpent and an idea formed. A crazy, dangerous idea. But sitting in this pit waiting to die was also crazy and dangerous. Danny pointed at himself and played a frequency that might mean name or identity. Then he played a pattern of his own creation, something unique. A name in serpent language the Alpha watched. Its tongue flickered. It made a sound, subsonic, that Danny's tablet captured. The same pattern Danny had created played back to him. The serpent was repeating his name. It understood the concept. Danny pointed at the Alpha and played a questioning pattern. The serpent responded with its own unique frequency. Danny listened to the pattern and thought for a moment. He needed something to call this creature. Looking at the old battle scars, at the way the other serpents respected this one, Danny thought of old warriors. Victors in ancient battles. Victor, Danny said out loud, even though the serpent couldn't understand English, but he also played the serpent's own frequency pattern back. I'll call you Victor. The serpent, Victor, moved closer. Danny felt a moment of fear but held still. Victor's head came down and pressed gently against Danny's chest. Not aggressive, almost curious. The other serpents watched, and Danny could feel the dynamics in the room shift. Over the next hours, Danny worked frantically. His tablet was dying, the battery draining fast. But he mapped out more of the serpent communication system. He discovered they could sense vibrations through the stone, could detect heat signatures through walls, could smell chemical changes in the air that indicated emotion and health. He also discovered something sad. The serpents were sick, all of them. Malnutrition, infections, wounds that had healed wrong because they never got proper medical care. The Scythrak kept them alive, but barely. Just healthy enough to be dangerous. Just hungry enough to be violent. Victor had an infected wound on his side, partially hidden by scales. It smelled bad. Without treatment, it would probably kill him eventually. Danny looked at the wound and then at his tablet. He had medical data stored in here. Basic xenobiology protocols. Could he help? Using his remaining battery power, Danny scanned the wound. The infection was bacterial, similar to things found on Earth. His tablet had information about broad-spectrum treatments. The problem was he didn't have medicine. He had nothing but his clothes, his glasses, and his dying tablet. Then Danny looked around the pit. There were bones here, remains of previous prisoners. He felt sick, but he forced himself to think scientifically. Bones, stone, biological waste, all materials that contained compounds. The fungi on the walls. Some species of fungi produce natural antibiotics. It took time. Danny scraped fungi from the walls, careful not to damage his hands. He used a sharp piece of bone to collect the spores and mix them with water that condensed on the cool stone. It was primitive, crude, nothing like real medicine, but it was something. The hardest part was approaching Victor again. Danny used the tablet to play calming frequencies and moved slowly. He showed Victor the mixture he'd made and used gestures to indicate the wound. Victor watched him with those intelligent eyes. Danny applied the fungal paste to the wound as gently as he could. Victor's muscles tensed, but the alpha didn't pull away. The other serpents watched in complete silence. Danny could feel their attention on him, every single one of them tracking his movements. When he finished, Danny backed away and sat down. His tablet finally died, screen going dark. The battery was completely drained. He was alone in the dark with a dozen massive serpents and no way to communicate except through instinct and hope. Above, through the opening far overhead, Danny could hear Sithrak voices. They sounded confused. Confused was good. Confused meant they didn't understand what was happening. The sensors must be telling them he was still alive, sitting calmly among their supposedly deadly war beasts. Victor moved close and coiled his massive body around Danny, not threatening, but protective. The other serpents settled down as well, forming a loose circle around them. Body heat from the serpents warmed the cold pit. Danny leaned back against Victor's scales and closed his eyes. He was exhausted, terrified, and had no idea if he would survive another hour. But he had done something the Sithrak never could. He had shown these creatures kindness. He had tried to help instead of hurt. Danny woke to the feeling of movement. His first confused thought was that he was back home in bed and his cat was walking across him. Then reality crashed back. He opened his eyes and saw scales inches from his face. One of the younger serpents was investigating him, tongue flickering across his arm. He stayed still until the serpent moved on. Weak light filtered down from the opening above. Morning, maybe, or whatever passed for morning on a captured ship in space. His body ached from sleeping on stone and he was thirsty, so thirsty. His mouth felt like it was full of cotton. Victor was still coiled nearby, massive head resting on his own body. The alpha's eyes were open, watching Danny. There was something different about the wound Danny had treated. The swelling looked less angry. Maybe the fungal paste was actually working, or maybe it was just wishful thinking. Danny sat up slowly and took stock of his situation. He was alive, which was more than the Sithrak expected. He had made some kind of connection with the serpents, but he was trapped in a pit with no food, no water, and no plan. His tablet was dead and useless, or was it? Danny pulled out the tablet and examined it more carefully. The battery was dead, but the device was designed for field research in harsh conditions. It had solar panels built into the back, tiny but efficient. In direct sunlight, it could recharge, though slowly. The dim light from above probably wasn't enough. But there might be another way. He remembered reading about heat-based charging systems. Some of the newer tablets could convert heat differences into electricity. The serpents were warm-blooded or close to it. Their body heat was significant. If Danny could position the tablet against Victor's scales for long enough, it might collect enough charge to turn back on. He approached Victor carefully, moving the way he had learned last night, slow and respectful. The alpha watched him but didn't move as Danny placed the tablet against the warmest part of Victor's body, just behind the head where blood vessels were close to the surface. While he waited, Danny explored the pit more thoroughly. It was larger than he first thought, maybe 60 feet across. The walls were smooth stone, impossible to climb. There were drainage grates in several places, probably to wash away blood and waste. The bones scattered around told grim stories. Most looked human, but some were from other species. The Sithrak threw all their prisoners down here. Danny examined the drainage grates more carefully. They were metal, corroded but strong. Below them, he could hear the sound of water moving. Some kind of waste system. The grates were bolted down with heavy fasteners. Even if he could remove them, the passages below would be tiny. But Danny was small. Smaller than most people, definitely smaller than the Sithrak. An idea started forming in his mind. A terrible, dangerous idea. But what choice did he have? Stay in this pit and hope for rescue that would never come? Die of thirst in a few days? No. If he was going to die, he would die trying. He went back to Victor and checked the tablet. A small charge had built up. Enough to turn it on for a few minutes. Danny activated it immediately and started working. He pulled up the ship schematics he had downloaded months ago when he first came aboard the Horizon. Every research vessel had detailed maps of its systems in case of emergency. The drainage system connected to the ship's water recycling network. From there, passages led to environmental controls, engineering, and eventually all the major systems. The passages were maintenance tunnels designed for robots and remote drones, not people. But Danny might fit. More importantly, the tunnel system would let him move through the ship unseen. The Sithrak were large. They wouldn't expect anyone to use passages too small for them. It was a weakness in their thinking, their assumption that smaller meant weaker and less dangerous. Danny looked at the serpents around him. They could sense vibrations through the stone. They could detect heat signatures. They were giving him information without realizing it. Through them, he could map where the Sithrak were on the ship. He could find out where they kept prisoners, where they stored weapons, where the bridge was located. But first, he needed to fully charge his tablet, and he needed water. He was getting desperate for water. Danny searched the pit again and found what he was looking for. Condensation collected on the cool stone walls in certain spots. Not much, but some. He used his hands to scrape the moisture into his mouth. It tasted like metal and stone, but it was wet. It would keep him alive a little longer. He also found fungi growing in damp corners. Some of it looked similar to edible species he'd studied. He took a tiny piece and chewed it carefully. Bitter, but not immediately poisonous. His stomach cramped with hunger, demanding more, but Danny forced himself to wait. If it was toxic, he'd know in an hour or so. If he was still alive and not vomiting, he could eat more. The hours passed slowly. Danny kept the tablet pressed against Victor, slowly building up charge. He used the time to strengthen his connection with the serpents. Without the tablet to translate, he had to rely on observation and instinct. He learned their body language. A certain tilt of the head meant curiosity. A particular hissing sound was a warning. The way they positioned their tails indicated mood and status. The younger serpents became more comfortable with him. They came close, investigating the strange small creature that smelled like fear but acted like friend. Danny touched their scales, feeling the texture, learning about their physical condition. They were all malnourished. Several had old injuries that had healed poorly. Above, Danny heard Sithrak voices periodically. They were arguing about something. He caught fragments of their hissing language. They couldn't understand why he was still alive. Some wanted to send someone down to check. Others thought it was funny, wanted to see how long the entertainment would last. One voice stood out. Female, Danny thought, though it was hard to tell with Sithrak. She was arguing that they should question him, that humans might have valuable information. Danny recognized the voice. One of the Sithrak who had been on the bridge during his capture. Lieutenant Kate Morrison was still alive. Kate was a real soldier, former military before she joined the research corps. She had tried to fight when the Sithrak boarded. Danny had seen her take down 2 of them before they overwhelmed her. If she was still alive, they must be keeping her for interrogation or ransom. Either way, she was a prisoner like him, just in a different kind of cell. By what Danny guessed was late afternoon, his tablet had enough charge to function for maybe an hour. He activated it and immediately started scanning. The serpent's sensory data combined with the ship schematics painted a picture of the captured vessel. The Sithrak crew was about 30 strong, spread throughout the ship. Most were in the main living areas. 6 were on the bridge. 2 were guarding the brig where Kate was held. None were near the pit. They really did think of it as nothing but an execution chamber. Danny also discovered something interesting. The Gorath serpents could sense things through their connection to each other. When one sensed something, the others knew about it. It was like a biological network, a hive mind, but not quite. They retained individual identity but shared information instantly. This changed everything. If Danny could properly communicate with them, if he could make them understand what he needed, they could be his eyes and ears throughout the entire ship. They could tell him where every single Sithrak was at any moment. Danny used his precious battery power to program a simple translation protocol. It wasn't sophisticated, but it might work. He recorded basic serpent frequency patterns and attached them to simple concepts. Danger, safe, human, Sithrak, fight, hide. It was crude, but language always started simple. He tested it on Victor. The tablet played a frequency pattern, while Danny pointed at himself and said friend. Then, he pointed at the opening above and played a different pattern with the word enemy. Victor's eyes tracked his movements. The Alpha was following along, understanding not just that Danny was communicating, but what he was trying to communicate. Danny played the pattern for friend again, and then made gestures including all the serpents. Then he played enemy and gestured upward to the Sithrak. Victor responded with a subsonic rumble that every serpent in the pit felt. Agreement. Understanding. Yes. The next part was harder. Danny needed to explain his plan. He used the tablet to show Victor images from the ship schematics. The drainage tunnels, the environmental systems, the bridge. He played frequency patterns for movement, for stealth, for attack. Victor watched the screen intently. The other serpents gathered close, all of them focused on what Danny was showing them. It was surreal, like teaching a class to giant alien snakes. But they were learning. Danny could see it in their reactions, in the way they responded to his patterns. He showed them the brig where Kate was held. One human, he tried to explain. Prisoner like him, friend, needed help. The serpents understood the concept of packmates needing rescue. Their own social structure was built on loyalty to the group. Danny then did something that scared him more than anything else so far. He showed them the opening above and played a frequency that combined escape and attack. He was asking them if they would fight. If they would help him take back the ship. The response was immediate and overwhelming. Every single serpent in the pit responded with frequencies that made Danny's bones vibrate. Eagerness, hunger, not for food but for revenge. These creatures had been tortured and starved. Danny waited until what he guessed was night cycle. The serpents told him through their shared senses that most of the Sithrak crew had gone to sleep. Only a few remained on watch. This was his chance, maybe his only chance. He worked on the drainage grate with a sharp piece of bone, scraping away at the corroded bolts. His hands were bleeding by the time the first bolt came loose. Then the second. The third was stuck tight, but Danny kept working, ignoring the pain. Finally, it gave way. The fourth bolt took another hour. The grate lifted up with a grinding sound that made Danny freeze. He waited, listening. No alarms, no footsteps. The Sithrak didn't expect anyone to escape through the waste tunnels. They probably didn't even monitor them. Danny looked down into the dark hole. The tunnel was barely 2 feet across. Even for him, it would be a tight fit. The smell coming up was horrible, but he'd smelled worse in the pit. He turned to Victor and the other serpents. When I give the signal, he said, knowing they couldn't understand his words but hoping they understood his intent. He played the frequency patterns on his tablet, using the last of its battery. Wait for my signal. Victor's eyes gleamed in the dark. The Alpha understood. All the serpents were coiled and ready, muscles tensed like springs waiting to release. They had been patient. They could wait a little longer. Danny lowered himself into the tunnel. It was even tighter than it looked. He had to pull himself along on his elbows, pushing with his feet. The walls pressed in on all sides. Water dripped on his back. Things he didn't want to think about squished under his hands. He focused on moving forward. The tablet was in his pocket, its faint glow helping him see maybe 2 feet ahead. The ship's schematics in his memory told him where to go. Take the third junction left. Follow the main pipe to the vertical shaft. Climb up to the environmental control level. Time lost meaning in the tunnels. Could have been 20 minutes. Could have been 2 hours. Danny's shoulders screamed in pain. His knees were scraped raw. But he kept crawling. There was no going back now. He reached the vertical shaft and almost cried with relief. It was wider, maybe 3 feet across with metal rungs built into the wall for maintenance drones. Danny grabbed the first rung and started climbing. His arm shook with exhaustion, but fear and determination pushed him upward. The environmental control room was empty. Danny pulled himself out of the maintenance access panel and collapsed on the floor, gasping. His whole body was shaking. He gave himself 60 seconds to rest, counting them in his head. Then he forced himself to stand. The control panels were Scythrak technology, but the underlying systems were still human-built. The Scythrak had taken the ship intact and hadn't changed the basic infrastructure yet. Danny's fingers moved across the keyboards, accessing systems he'd studied as part of his research training. First step. He needed to synthesize pheromones. The serpents had taught him what chemicals the Scythrak responded to. Danny programmed the environmental system to produce a modified version, something that would make the Scythrak nervous and disoriented, without them understanding why. The ship's synthesis lab could produce complex organic compounds. It was meant for medicine and research, but Danny repurposed it. Within minutes, the ventilation system started pumping the pheromones throughout the ship. Not enough to incapacitate, just enough to put them on edge. Second step. He accessed the security systems. The Scythrak had changed the command codes, but they hadn't changed the backdoor maintenance protocols. Every ship had them. Hidden access points that engineers could use if the main systems failed. Danny found them and started mapping the ship's internal sensors. He could see everything now. Every Scythrak, their locations, their heat signatures. The 2 guards outside Kate's cell in the brig. The 6 on the bridge. The others scattered through crew quarters. He could see Kate too, alive and moving in her cell. Third step. Danny found the pit's environmental controls. The force field that kept the opening sealed had an emergency release. He activated it, then immediately triggered the fire suppression system in the corridors above the pit. Foam and alarms. Chaos. Danny's hands flew across the controls. He opened every door between the pit and the main corridors. Then he sent a signal through the ship's communication system. A specific frequency that his dying tablet would pick up and translate into the attack command he'd programmed. In the pit, 20 feet below the deck, Victor received the signal. The Alpha let out a sound that was felt more than heard. Every serpent in the pit surged upward through the now open hatch. The Scythrak never had a chance to understand what was happening. One moment they were responding to fire alarms and wondering why they felt anxious. The next moment, war beasts they thought they controlled were flooding into the corridors, but these beasts weren't attacking randomly. They were following a plan. Danny watched through the security feeds as the serpents moved with deadly precision. They disabled the Scythrak in the corridors first, coiling around them and crushing weapons before the aliens could react. Not killing, not yet. Danny had been clear about that in his patterns. They needed hostages, not corpses. He ran from environmental control, heading toward the brig. The corridors were chaos. Foam covered the floors. Alarms shrieked. Scythrak voices shouted in confusion and fear. Danny stayed low, moving fast, avoiding contact. 2 serpents met him at a junction. Not Victor, but 2 of the younger ones he'd befriended. They fell in beside him like guard dogs, matching his pace. Together they moved toward the brig. The 2 guards outside Kate's cell were already down. A serpent held each one pinned to the floor. Danny ran to the cell door and worked the controls. The lock clicked open. Kate stumbled out, her face bruised and her uniform torn. "Danny?" She stared at him like he was a ghost. "How are you alive? What's happening?" "No time," Danny said. His voice came out hoarse from dehydration and fear. "Follow me. I'll explain later." Kate looked at the serpents and her hand went to her empty holster, searching for a weapon that wasn't there. The serpents hissed at her. Danny stepped between them quickly. "They're with us," he said. "They're on our side. Trust me." Kate looked at him like he was insane, but explosions and shouts echoed through the ship. Whatever was happening, staying in the brig wasn't safe. She nodded and followed. They ran through the corridors with their serpent escort. More of the creatures had joined them, responding to signals Danny couldn't hear but that they all felt. The pack was coordinating, moving like a single organism. They found Velcros on the bridge. The Scythrak commander was surrounded by his remaining guards, weapons drawn. Victor and 6 other serpents had them cornered. It was a standoff. The Scythrak could kill some of the serpents, but not before the serpents killed all of them. Danny walked onto the bridge. His legs were shaking so badly he could barely stand. His clothes were filthy. His glasses were cracked. He looked like he'd been dragged through hell, which wasn't far from the truth. But he was alive and he was in control. "Velcros," Danny said. His voice echoed in the sudden silence. "I believe we need to talk." The Scythrak commander stared at him with pure hatred. "Impossible," he hissed. "The humans should be dead. The beasts should have eaten you." "You never understood them," Danny said. He walked forward, Victor moving beside him. The alpha serpent was twice the size of Danny, but they moved together like partners. You thought they were weapons. You thought fear and pain were the only ways to control them. You were wrong. Velcros made a move toward Danny. Victor struck faster than sight, stopping inches from the Sithrak's face. The Alpha's jaws were open, showing rows of teeth that could tear through metal. Velcros froze. "Tell your crew to stand down," Danny said. "Tell them to drop their weapons and move to the cargo bay. If they cooperate, no one else dies." "Why should I?" Velcros growled. "You are prey. Weak human. Even with the beasts, you cannot win. More Sithrak will come. They will destroy you." "Maybe," Danny admitted. "But right now, in this moment, I have control of this ship. Your war beasts answer to me now. Your environmental systems answer to me. Your security systems answer to me. You're breathing because I'm letting you breathe." Kate moved to one of the bridge stations. Her hands flew over the controls, accessing weapons and communications. "Danny, we have incoming. 3 human ships responding to the Horizon's distress call. They'll be here in 2 hours. Velcros' eyes widened slightly. The calculation was clear in his expression. 2 hours. He could try to fight, possibly kill the human and some serpents, but then face human warships with a damaged crew. Or he could surrender now and possibly survive to fight another day. "What do you want?" Velcros asked finally. Danny thought about all the people who died. His friends. The captain. The crew who never had a chance. He thought about the serpents, tortured and starved for entertainment. He thought about Kate, beaten and scheduled for execution. Anger burned in his chest, hot and fierce, but revenge wouldn't bring anyone back. More death wouldn't honor the dead. "I want you in the cargo bay with your crew," Danny said. "I want you to think about why you lost today. A weak human with no weapons defeated you, not because I was stronger, because I understood something you didn't." "What?" Velcro spat the word. "That partnership is more powerful than domination, Dan." The human ships arrived exactly on schedule. 3 destroyers, heavily armed and ready for combat. What they found instead was a captured research vessel under the control of a 23-year-old researcher and a pack of alien war beasts. Commander Lisa Park came aboard personally. She was a career military officer with 30 years of service and 3 major conflicts under her belt. She had seen a lot in her time, but nothing had prepared her for the sight of Danny Cooper sitting on the bridge in torn clothes and cracked glasses, with a massive serpent coiled beside the command chair. "Identify yourself," she said, hand on her sidearm. "Danny Cooper, xenobiology researcher, assigned to the Horizon," Danny said. He sounded exhausted. "I'm the only surviving member of the science crew. Lieutenant Kate Morrison is the only surviving military personnel. The Sithrak crew is contained in the cargo bay. No casualties since we took control." Lisa's eyes moved from Danny to the serpent to the other serpents positioned around the bridge. "Those are Gorath serpents. Sithrak War beasts. How are they not attacking?" "Because they're not mindless weapons," Danny said. "And they're tired of being treated like they are." It took hours to sort everything out. Lisa brought her security team aboard, but they kept their distance from the serpents. Kate gave her report describing the initial attack, her capture, and then Danny's impossible rescue. Other human personnel searched the ship, documented everything, checked the Sithrak prisoners. Danny stayed on the bridge with Victor. The Alpha wouldn't leave his side, and honestly, Danny was grateful for the company. His hand still shook when he thought about everything that happened. Climbing through those tunnels, facing Velcros. Any of it could have gone wrong. He could have died a dozen different ways, but he hadn't, and now people wanted answers. The debriefing happened in the Horizon's conference room, which was mostly intact. Lisa sat across from Danny with Kate beside him and a recording device on the table. Several other officers were present, including a doctor who had examined Danny and declared him dehydrated, malnourished, and in shock, but alive. "Walk me through it," Lisa said. From the beginning, Danny told the story. The attack, being thrown in the pit, his observations of the serpents, the realization that they were intelligent and suffering, his decision to communicate with them, the alliance, the escape plan, the uprising. When he finished, the room was silent. "You're telling me," Lisa said slowly, "that you befriended alien war beasts by treating an infected wound with fungus and teaching them to trust you?" "Basically, yes," Danny said. "That's the stupidest thing I've ever heard." Lisa leaned back in her chair. "It should have gotten you killed 10 different ways." "I know," Danny admitted, "but I didn't have any other options. And I couldn't just sit there and wait to die. Lisa looked at Kate. Lieutenant, your assessment? He saved my life, Kate said simply. The Sithrak were going to execute me at dawn. Danny and the serpents broke me out. Everything he's saying matches what I saw. Those creatures follow his commands, not out of fear. They trust him. One of the other officers spoke up. A thin man with commander's bars. What about the Sithrak prisoners? They're claiming the human used biological weapons on them. Some kind of fear toxin? Pheromones, Danny corrected. I synthesized compounds based on Sithrak biochemistry. It made them anxious, not incapacitated. I needed an advantage. That's still a biological weapon, the officer said. It's creative use of available resources, Lisa cut in. She studied Danny for a long moment. The question is, what do we do now? We have a Sithrak crew in custody. We have intelligence about their boarding tactics and ship systems. We have a first contact situation with an intelligent species the Sithrak enslaved. And we have a researcher who somehow became the alpha of a serpent pack. I'm not their alpha, Danny protested. Victor is the alpha. I just communicate with them. The serpents follow you, Kate said gently. You give commands, they obey. That makes you the alpha, Danny, whether you want to be or not. Danny looked down at his hands. They were bandaged now, covering the cuts from scraping away at the drainage grate. Everything felt surreal. 2 days ago, he was just a researcher studying alien microbes. Now he was sitting in a military debriefing being called the alpha of war beasts. What happens to the Sithrak? He asked. They'll be taken to the nearest military station, Lisa said. Interrogated. Probably exchanged eventually. The Sithrak Empire will want them back. And the serpents? The room went quiet again. Lisa exchanged glances with the other officers. That's complicated, she said finally. Technically, they're Sithrak property. Spoils of war. They should be studied, possibly contained. No. Danny's voice came out harder than he intended. No, they're not property. They're intelligent beings who were enslaved and tortured. You can't just lock them up again. They're dangerous, the thin officer argued. Each one could kill multiple people before being stopped. We can't just let them roam free. They're only dangerous when threatened or starved, Danny shot back. They don't attack for no reason. They have social structures, communication, emotions. They're people, just not human people. Lisa held up a hand, stopping the argument. Let me talk to my superiors. This isn't a decision I can make alone. She looked at Danny. In the meantime, those serpents seem to listen to you. Can you keep them under control? They're already under control, Danny said. They don't need to be controlled. They need to be respected. Can you work with them? Lisa rephrased. Keep them calm while we figure this out. Danny nodded. Yes, but I have conditions. You're not really in a position to make demands, the thin officer said. Actually, he is, Kate interrupted. Because if Danny tells those serpents to stop cooperating, we've got a problem. They're loyal to him, not us. Lisa considered this. What conditions? The serpents get proper medical care, Danny said. Real food, not whatever scraps the Sithrak gave them. And someone needs to study them properly, not as weapons, as a species. They deserve that much. Done, Lisa said. Anything else? I want to be part of the research team, Danny said. I'm the only human who can communicate with them. They trust me. You need me. Lisa smiled slightly. You're right. We do, she stood up. Get some rest, Cooper. We'll continue this conversation after you've had food, water, and about 12 hours of sleep. The next days were a blur. Danny ate real food for the first time in what felt like forever. He slept in an actual bed. Doctors examined him thoroughly, treating his injuries and monitoring him for any lingering effects from his ordeal. But mostly he worked with the serpents. A xenobiology team arrived from one of the destroyers, and Danny taught them everything he'd learned. How to read serpent body language, how to use frequency communication, how to approach without triggering defensive responses. The team discovered that Danny was right. The Goreth serpents were highly intelligent, possibly comparable to dolphins or great apes. They had been bioengineered millennia ago by a species called the Architects, who had long since vanished. The Sithrak had found them on a dead world and enslaved them, never realizing what they had. Victor and his pack began to recover under proper care. The infected wounds healed. Their scales became brighter. They gained weight. Most importantly, they began to show behaviors the researchers had never seen before. Play, curiosity, affection, things that creatures living in constant fear and pain couldn't express. News of what happened spread fast. The story of the nerdy researcher who turned war beasts into allies became famous. Some people called Danny a hero, others called him reckless. A few called him insane. Danny ignored most of it. He was too busy working. The Sithrak prisoners were eventually exchanged, as Lisa predicted. But before Velcros left, Danny visited him in the brig. The proud commander looked smaller somehow, defeated in a way that had nothing to do with physical imprisonment. "You shamed us," Velcro said when Danny entered. "The story will spread. The Sithrak who lost to prey." "Good," Danny said. "Maybe it will make your people think. About how you treat others. About what real strength means." "You know nothing of strength," Velcros hissed. But there was no real anger in it. Just emptiness. "I know that I survived your war beasts by being kind to them," Danny said. "I know that I took your ship without killing anyone. I know that fear and pain are the weapons of the weak, not the strong. If that's not strength, I don't know what is." He left Velcro sitting in silence. 3 months later, Danny stood in a new facility built specifically for interspecies research. It was located on a peaceful moon far from combat zones. The building was large, with spaces designed for both humans and serpents. Victor and his pack lived there, not as prisoners but as partners in research. Danny had been promoted. Not to a military rank, but to director of the Interspecies Communication Institute. It was a new department, created specifically because of what he'd done. His job was to study the Goroth serpents and find other enslaved or mistreated intelligent species across the galaxy. Kate worked with him, heading security. She joked that she'd never lived down being rescued by a nerd and his snake friends, but she smiled when she said it. They worked well together, the soldier and the researcher. Other humans came to learn from Danny. Some were scientists. Others were diplomats. They all wanted to understand how he'd done it.
How